Thank you all for joining this this evening for this mayoral runoff forum, which is sponsored by FitFam El Paso and El Paso Matters. We're also grateful for the team at El Paso Community College, which has graciously provided this beautiful facility tonight. My name is Bob Moore. I'm the CEO of El Paso Matters, which is our community's nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization. Tonight we're privileged to hear from the two candidates who emerged from the November 5th general election to make the runoff. To my right is El Paso businessman Renard Johnson, who finished first in the initial round of voting. And please feel free to applaud. And to my left is District 1 City Representative Brian Kennedy, who finished a close second in the first round of voting. Voters go back to the polls one more time to select a mayor, 5 city representatives, and a municipal judge. And yes, the election is right in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I don't think either candidate would have chosen that schedule, but that's what we have. Early voting is December 2nd through the 10th, and Election Day is on Saturday, December 14th. Our goal with this forum tonight is to provide voters with information to help them decide which candidate they believe should lead El Paso city government for the next 4 years. Our conversation today starts with a simple question. What would you do if you're elected mayor? We've asked voters to submit questions for the candidates via FitFam and via El Paso Matters. I've pulled together a number of submitted questions that had some common themes to help me shape this conversation tonight. The candidates have not seen the questions in advance. I will ask the questions and each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. I have the discretion to ask follow-up questions for clarification. We'll start with 90-second opening statements from each candidate. We did a coin flip before beginning tonight to determine who would give the first opening statement and the last closing statement. Mr. Johnson won the coin flip and chose to do the final closing statement. Mr. Kennedy opted to do the second opening statement then. So the first candidate we'll hear from tonight is Renard Johnson. Candidates, just so you know, Bill Pitchcolin from our team will have some timing. He'll let you know when you have 30 seconds left and then 0 seconds. So Mr. Johnson, you can start with opening remarks and you have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you, Bob, for having us out this evening, and hello El Paso and hello FitFam. You know, I guess if you're going to make FitFam, this is the best way to do it, and so I want to thank you guys for putting on this forum, and I just want to take a few minutes to tell some of the audience a little bit about me and who I am. My name is Renard Johnson. I'm a mayoral candidate, and at one point there was 8 of us, and now there's only 2 of us left remaining. And I am from the northeast side of town. I went to Andrews High School. And after Andrews, I went on to the University of Texas at El Paso, where I got my Bachelor's of Administration degree from the College of Business. I am a Golden Nugget recipient from the College of Business at UTEP. I am also a distinguished alumni from our university. While still a student at UTEP in 1994, I started a engineering and IT company that's headquartered here in El Paso. The name of my company is Management Engineering Technologies International Inc., or METI is what we go by. My company has about 800 staff members that are located here in the U.S. and worldwide. So I built a company from scratch, from nothing. I'm a product of El Paso. I've been here my whole life, and I'm looking forward to taking my skills that I've learned in business and applying that to the city and growing our city and bringing us together. Thank you.
Mr. Kennedy, you have 90 seconds for your opening remarks.
Thank you. My name is Brian Kennedy, and I was not born here, but I did get to El Paso as quick as I could, which is one of the best decisions I've ever made. The Army brought me here. I was a Russian, Polish, Czechoslovakian, Serbo-Croatian translator, and I spent the time in the Army here, and I realized that I'd found home. This is the place that I love. We're all here because we love El Paso, and so it's time for us to just move forward and keep El Paso moving forward. I've spent many years running the Coliseum and doing sports and entertainment, And at 59 years old, I had a chance to sit down and talking to my wife. We talked about living without regrets. I said I'd always wanted to be an attorney. And she said, well, what are you waiting for? So at 59 years old, I went to law school, graduated cum laude at 62, and I've been an attorney ever since. First I was sports and entertainment. Then after COVID, there was no sports and entertainment. So I became a criminal defense attorney. I will say I've been a city council member for 2 years. I am mayor pro tem, which has been great because I've been able to sit in the meetings and watch what's going on as the city began to move forward and progress. And through the migrant crisis and the surges, I was in those meetings. I'd like to take the skills that I've gathered throughout my life and continue to help El Paso keep moving forward.
So I want to start our conversation tonight with several questions about economic development, which I think is a top-of-mind issue for a lot of voters. And Mr. Kennedy, I'll give you the first opportunity to address the first question. What role do city-funded quality of life initiatives play in economic development, and how would you approach that if you're elected mayor?
Well, it depends on your definition of quality of life. I mean, for 10 years and 12 years, we decided we were going to try and build things because it would help build our tax base and build people and bring people into town. Our population is now stagnant, and that's an issue. I think that some things need to be built as looking at quality of life. Quality of life is fixing roads, making sure people can buy houses because they're not taxed out of the taxes, and so can their kids and grandkids, and they're safe with police and fire. That's the first quality of life. As far as large projects, they've all got to be public-private because very honestly, we've seen what happened. Every single bond issue in 2012 was underestimated in price. Every single one of them. Some of them up to 300% because we didn't tell people the truth. We didn't tell them what it was and what it was going to cost. If we're going to go to people and ask them, do you want us to build the decision, if knowing all the facts, they want to do it.
Mr. Johnson, how would you approach city-funded quality of life issues as part of an economic development strategy? And to build off of what Mr. Kennedy said, probably a good idea to talk about what do you mean by quality of life?
Yeah, so quality of life for me, what that means is that's when you leave your front door, you walk down your sidewalk, you get in your car, and you drive down the infrastructure. I can tell you that I've knocked on thousands of doors in our community, and people are upset over the potholes in El Paso. They want the infrastructure repaired. We have some of the highest taxes in the state. We're number 6 in the country with taxes. So the only way we can improve quality of life and improve infrastructure and lower your taxes is through economic development. So economic development and bringing in more of a commercial base to El Paso will help offset and lower your taxes and then bring more quality of life. Quality of life encompasses a number of things. Again, I mentioned the potholes. That is quality of life. The roads you drive on, the farmers markets, the stores. I want to go back and say how proud I am of our community and the public-private partnership that we put together with La Nube. That is one of the best children's museums in the country. So when El Paso wants to get something done, we can do it. La Nube is just one example of what we can do in the area of quality of life. And you know, again, it was voted on in 2012. I knocked on one lady's door and she says, Renard, my kids are old now. We started doing this in 2012. It's 2024. So we have to get to market quicker because the longer you delay, the more the costs are. So quality of life is a number of things, but I do agree we need to have more public-private partnerships, and we can do that.
When we talk about economic development, one of the tools in the toolkit for any city in Texas are what are known as 380 incentives. These are tax incentives that are provided to businesses in exchange for them meeting certain conditions around hiring and expansion. What types of incentives do you support, and what standards, especially around wages, should the city include in these agreements? Mr. Johnson, I'll go to you first.
So 380 agreements, the incentive agreements that can be used, if they're used correctly, they're a very effective tool. I think one of the things we have to recognize as a community, though, is that other Texas cities are going to use 380 agreements to attract businesses to their community. So when we're going to look at negotiating a 380 agreement, we need to, number one, make sure we negotiate it correctly. And number two, that they're providing jobs to El Paso, and these jobs are high-paying jobs, and they're jobs that our youth can have and stay in our community. We want to make sure that we just don't incentivize everyone to come to El Paso. Not every company needs a 380 agreement to come to beautiful El Paso. El Paso's a gorgeous community, and we don't have to give away El Paso. So I think it's a tool we can use, but we have to remember, other communities are going to offer 380 agreements. And if it's a business we want in El Paso, we have to sit down and make sure that it makes economic sense for our community. But it has to come with jobs. If we're going to give a 380 agreement to a company that's not going to be bringing jobs, they're just going to have a warehouse here with maybe 4 or 5 employees, that may not need a 380 agreement. So we have to make sure that when we use those tools, which they're very effective, that we get the investment out of that 380 agreement that benefits El Paso, and ultimately will go into our tax base and lower your taxes.
Can I ask a brief follow-up on that? You mentioned good-paying jobs as a criteria. What's your definition of a good-paying job? So if we incentivize job creation, is there a threshold, like on an hourly wage, that the city should be looking at?
I think instead of going into the threshold, why don't we look at the industry? So I would say aerospace is a very good area that we can look at and incentivize aerospace companies that want to come to El Paso and provide those high-paying jobs for aerospace engineering. I would also say we can look at healthcare, because what I've learned is for every 1 doctor that we employ, it creates 4 jobs. And those are 4 high-paying jobs. All work is good work, but we also have to focus on the retention and the expansion of our local small businesses. We need to grow our small businesses. We need to make them become the next big business. So there's a lot of opportunity there. So when I say that, there's aerospace, there's medical, and there's tech.
Mr. Kennedy, you've obviously had experience already with 380 agreements as a member of City Council. As you've looked at these agreements that come to you, what have you looked for, and how would you approach this if being elected mayor?
Well, there's a couple of things. The first one is, yeah, you have to have number of jobs and you have to have what they're getting paid. The city's decided that we're going to work towards, and we'll quickly be there, $15 an hour as a minimum just for anything we do. We'd like to have it above that. When somebody comes in and they want incentives, they should be self-generated incentives, in that you may get rebates off the taxes that you generate, but you're not reaching into the taxpayer's pocket to help bring businesses in. The other thing is we have to make sure that those people we give 380 agreements to are actually doing what we said they were going to do. And that's why the Financial Oversight and Audit Committee started looking at 380 agreements. If you have a 380 agreement and you say you're going to give us 100 jobs at $20 an hour, at the end of the first year we have to check and make sure, did you give us 100 jobs at $20 an hour? And if you didn't, guess what? You're now not getting the rebates you were going to get. You're not getting the incentives you were going to get. And we've started adding something new called clawback clauses. The advantage, I've cut some of these as an attorney, it means if you don't do what you said you were going to do, you owe us our money back. This is not one where we say, we gave you $1 million, you didn't do what we told you to, well, just keep the money. Some of the 380 agreements used to say that. We have to make sure that we're protecting our money and our incentives. It's real simple. A clawback clause on every deal, and make sure they're giving us the jobs they said they were going to give us, because that makes the deal worth it.
So a quick follow-up question for you then. How effective has the city's use of 380 agreements been over the last decade, including the 2 years you've been on council?
Initially, if you go back at a decade, there was a span where we were pretty much given 380 agreements to anybody that knocked on the door. And I will say that's changed in the last 4 years. It started to shift about 4 years ago, and it's now to a point where we are very careful on what is it you're bringing. I think there was a time period between 4 and 7 or 8 years ago that it was not being used effectively. It was pretty much, we'll just give you, oh, you're coming to town, here, have one. And it was almost a situation where people were getting 380 agreements and would come to us and say, I don't really need it. They go, well, yeah, it's okay, you can have it anyway, you know. And I think that's changed. I think the philosophy has now changed to where we want to see measurables on what you're going to do for El Paso, not just we think it's a cool job.
I want to talk about, Brian, this is something you mentioned in your opening statement, but Census Bureau estimates show that the population in the city of El Paso essentially ceased growing after 2012 when the Army completed the build-out of Fort Bliss. Every year, thousands more people move away from the city than move in. Is this something that El Paso should be concerned about? And Mr. Kennedy, I'll let you go ahead and have the first
Well,
response.
absolutely, because for the services you provide, there's inflation, which means you're going to have the same people giving more. And yes, bringing businesses in is a good idea. There's some other ways we can help defeat that. We have got to do some tourism, we've got to do some sports tourism, we've got to have some ways to bring in fresh money, because sales tax actually brings in about half of what property tax does. So generating sales tax can make a good idea. It is a problem, and if you take a look in the counties census, you can see how all the outlying cities were growing dramatically, and the city of El Paso was not. It was fairly stagnant. A lot of that has to do with property taxes. So that's why we've got to get a grip on property taxes. That's why we're really proud of the fact that for 2 years in a row, we've had no new revenue collected from property taxes from the city portion of the bill. There is, of course, 5 people that tax. We can hold the line, and if the other 4 don't, it's still a problem. But I think we have to look at that holistically with all 5 entities to say we have got to find a way to get a grip on that, and it is something we should worry about. Because the question then is, how do you continue to quickly provide all the services we want when we have a stagnant population? So it is something we should be very concerned about.
Quick follow-up question. You mentioned that people choose to move outside the city limits because of lower property taxes, and that's something that I hear quite a bit. How do you know that? And why would you say it's property taxes that are driving it instead of lower cost housing? And housing out there is much cheaper than it is in the city.
When we start talking to the people that were building the homes and the people that were doing the developments themselves, the 2 things they want is the total payment, and yeah, the homes may be more inexpensive outside there, and one of the reasons is because they're looking at their entire payment. And the entire payment includes not just the cost of the house, but also the cost of the taxes. So when they go out there and they say, hey, I can buy this house for $150,000, $200,000 in El Paso, but I can't afford it because the taxes push the payment above what my means are. It's so close that for every bit of taxes you put on it, you lose some potential buyers.
But out in the non-incorporated areas, so as opposed to Horizon or something like that, the municipal tax is 0. And so you can't cut the El Paso municipal tax to 0 to compete with that.
Not to that amount, but you can make it where the proximity to El Paso is beneficial for the minimal amount of increase in taxes. And I think that if you say the proximity is what people want, they want to be close to all the services, close to everything. The reason they get driven out is they just go, taxes are so high, my total payment is so high, it has made it where I can't even qualify to get the house I want.
Mr. Johnson, talk about your views on the stagnant population in El Paso, what's been driving it, and if you'd like to see it reversed, like what kind of steps could we take to reverse that?
Sure. So I know that you know your numbers. There's about 6,000 net negative that we've lost since that time period that have left El Paso and moved elsewhere, moved to our counties. I think this is more of an affordable housing discussion, and I can tell you, I'm gonna use Martha's name for example. When I knocked on her door, she said, "You know, Renard, I can't afford to live in El Paso no more. The taxes are too high. It's impossible to have a no new revenue tax increase and cut your way, expenses and grow your top line revenue. It's impossible to do that." I've talked to a lot of experts that said doing that model is not sustainable, and we're going to be in trouble. So you cannot continue to do that. No city's doing that. You can't just keep that sustainable and expect to dig your way out of it. Cut services, it does a number of things. So what we have to do is we have to get these taxes under control. People are not going to move back into the city when your taxes are this high. When I talk about affordable housing, we got to look at those incentives to bring our builders to start doing more infill projects within El Paso and give them some tax incentives that they can come back, build affordable homes in El Paso. Because if we don't, what ultimately happens when your taxes go up as a multifamily developer, when you have apartments and your taxes are high, you end up passing that on to the tenants. So the tenants are ultimately taxed out of their home, so they leave. So we've got to figure out a way to get that under control, and you cannot cut expenses and grow your top line revenue. It's impossible.
So we've had a couple mentions of El Paso's tax situation and how that affects people. So I went to an organization called the Tax Foundation to kind of look into this a little bit. The Tax Foundation has really good data on the median property tax in every county in the country. And so I just isolated Texas. And among the 10 most populous counties in Texas, El Paso's property tax ranks 9th. Hidalgo County is the only one lower. The other large cities all have not just higher median property tax bills than El Paso, but significantly higher, 25 to 200% more. These also happen to be the communities where you look at where El Paso's going, or El Pasoans are going, where they're moving to. So the question, the issue about property taxation, and what you hear a lot of is El Paso has the highest property taxes in Texas, really isn't true. So that the median property tax bill in El Paso is like $3,300 in 2022. So it would seem to me that the bigger issue, because taxes are all relative, right, to how much money you have, it seems to me the bigger issue is the wages and income levels, no?
Well, I think that's certainly a portion of it, but I can tell you that here in El Paso, 70% of the taxes fall on the residents, 30% falls on the commercial base. You take a city like Austin, Texas, and it's just the reverse. In Austin, Texas, it's 70% on the commercial, 30% on the residents. So we've got to get that flipped around. And the only way you can do that is through economic development. I can also tell you that, we are one of the highest tax cities in the nation. When you look at that report, it's going to show we're in the top 10, and that's not a bad.
That just looks at the tax rate, though.
Absolutely.
And the issue with property taxes is a two-part formula, right? Rates times value. Home values in El Paso are still significantly lower, so it's yielding much lower tax bills. I just want to kind of make that clear.
Yeah, I think when you look at what the El Pasoans are feeling, though, your taxes have gone up. In fact, we'll touch on something to where that no new revenue tax rate, when you look at your water bill, there's a $2 fee on your water bill that started in September. Most of us didn't even know this. For your gray trash bin. Did your gray trash bin change between August and September? Why are they moving the taxes to other taxing mechanisms? So, again, if anyone in this room's taxes went down, you could raise your hands. Your taxes went up. So we have to come up with a plan to lower the taxes. When you knock on the doors in El Paso, they're telling you, lower the taxes. And that's something I want to get to work on.
And to be fair, I've never met a voter in my life who says, please raise my taxes, sir. So I get that. Mr. Kennedy, or Mr. Johnson, I'm going to start with you on this next question. Despite El Paso's flat population for a decade, development has continued in the west, northeast, and east parts of the city. We're essentially spreading the same number of people over a wider area, which carries costs of new infrastructure. If elected mayor, how would you approach policies that promote outward development versus policies that promote infill development?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about those incentives, and what we've got to do is we've got to work with the developers to start doing more development inside the city limits and doing more infill projects. As they're moving out of El Paso into the outskirts, the cost for them are going down. But I think more importantly, what we've got to look at is making sure that our city departments are staffed to where, whether it's permitting, whether it's anything that the developers need to do their jobs, that we do it quicker. Because what happens is the longer we have delays in speed in city government, it raises your cost. So we talked about La Nube. La Nube was from 2012. We've talked about a number of things, but by the time you get to build it, it takes more money. So we have to incentivize builders to look at infill projects, to come into El Paso city limits and build housing that's affordable. The builders are moving to the outskirts because land is cheaper, acquisition costs are lower, and they can build quicker. So we need to figure out to tell them, hey, we want you back in El Paso. And if we don't figure out how to do that, they're going to continue to sprawl outside of El Paso into the county and do more of that.
A quick follow-up then. You mentioned incentivizing infill development, but you can also disincentivize sprawl. John Ballou at El Paso Water Utilities for the last couple of years has been pushing to increase impact fees to make new development, especially on the fringes, carry more of the cost of water. How do you feel about those impact fees?
Yeah, so the impact fees, at the end of the day, they pass them on to us. So you've got to look at ways of working with the builders to lower their cost. So impact fees, if the builders are going to be charged an impact fee, they're going to pass it on to the consumer. So we've got to look at ways, you know, that they're moving to the county. They're moving outside of El Paso, and we shouldn't absorb all of the impact fees, but we've got to look at ways that they don't pass that back on to the consumers.
Without the impact fees, the cost is passed back to the existing ratepayers. Right. Mr. Kennedy, what are your thoughts on approaching infill development versus outward growth, or sprawl, as some people call it?
Well, we just did have a project that was infill a couple of weeks ago, and that's kind of a model that we're looking at. We're looking for where there's open land, where there's buildings that can be renovated. We also had an incentive for the Popular, which is going to be hopefully housing and apartments downtown. So this is one of the projects that we're really excited about, is the availability of saying, looking concentric to downtown area and working very close to there, and saying if you're doing some housing there, we're going to do some incentives, we're going to find some things, but we also have to do some incentives that make it more livable, more walkable. Things like a grocery store downtown. What a great concept, where you could walk to your grocery store. So we have to do some things that are not just the housing themselves, but also the ancillaries that people need and the amenities people need that are close enough to their housing, where then it becomes more of a project. I think that we do have a program to do some infill. I think we need to do that. I think that I agree that if you give somebody an impact fee and you think the builders are going to foot that bill, they're not. They will pass it through to the buyer. It's just that simple. So the question is if we as a city decide we're going to pay $1 to help a new project start, but we're going to get $10 back in taxes, that's a good investment. But we have to make sure that when we are paying for any infrastructure, that it's going to generate enough tax revenue to make it worth our while.
So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, when given the opportunity to vote on the water utilities impact fee, you opposed it, right? As I mentioned to Mr. Johnson, the alternative then is that the cost of that expansion is spread out among the existing ratepayers, so the existing ratepayers are essentially subsidizing that growth. I mean,
but I don't know that it's a subsidization. I think that it is an investment, because if rooftops mean revenue. And once we start these housing projects, we sit down and say, okay, this is what it's going to cost us for the infrastructure. And if you take a look at what is the property tax going to generate from those houses, you can start looking at that saying, okay, now this makes sense. Now it's just, if you want to give you $1 and you want to build a housing project, like I said, you're going to give me back $10 in taxes. I want to do that every day, twice a day. If somebody says it's going to cost me $10 due to the infrastructure, I'm only getting $1 back, that doesn't make sense. And that's what we have to start looking at with projects. And that's why I opposed impact fees. Also because we talk about affordable housing, that's a fast way to drive that house cost up. If you say we're going to charge you $17,000, it could be 10% increase, and guess what? There's a whole bunch of people that you just ruled out from buying that house.
Last question on economic development. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the data fresh out this week, the average private sector weekly wage in El Paso in the second quarter of this year was around $920. That is less than 60% of the state and national averages for private sector wages. This has been a longstanding issue in El Paso, so I'd like to get your views on how we create higher paying jobs in El Paso. And Mr. Kennedy, I'll start with you on that.
I think that the city has to be a leader, and it started to be a leader, saying we are going to pay our people a better wage. We're going to pay the city employees a better wage. We're going to raise the minimum and bring it up. We can't control what the store down the street or what the manufacturer pays, because that's not under our control. But what we can do is, when we use our incentives, we tie it directly to, as we said with 380 agreements, how many jobs and how much you're going to pay. That's the important part. So you say, if you want an incentive to bring your business to El Paso, we want to do that. We also want to have good city employees with benefits. The only people in El Paso that did not get a cost of living increase was solved this week. That was police officers and firefighters on Tier 2. Yeah, the only people in the city of El Paso, employees, that didn't get a cost of living increase were those people. It was solved this week with a unanimous vote. That's the way I think we can lead the pack and say, you've got to give these benefits, you've got to give this pay, because honestly, when we're that competitive, the other people that want our workforce, which is a finite workforce, will have to pay more money, because we're all in competition for the same workers.
So with respect, though, the question was about private sector wages, and you're talking about government wages.
Right.
So how do you raise private sector wages in El Paso? And I realize it's not just the city's job, and the city can't do it alone, but what role can the city do in getting us above this 60% number that we've been stuck at for generations?
The only thing the city, anyone who says the city has control about a private industry is wrong, because we don't. What we can do is say that if you're going to have any money from the city, you have to pay better wages. That's the only thing we have control over. We don't have control to go down to the grocery store and say you must pay $15 an hour.
But you do. In your 380 agreements, you can say if you
In our
get a
380
380 agreement, you have to provide.
And that's what I
extra.
was saying. If we have an incentive, we can say you have to pay these wages.
Are you doing that right now?
Yeah, that is one of the requirements when we do our 380 agreements.
What's the requirement?
It depends on what the job is and what the hourly rate is. I think it should be set at a minimum of what the city's goal is, which is a minimum of $15 an hour and go up from there.
Right. So $15 an hour is $900 or it's $600 a week. So I mean, even less than the $900.
For the laborers, that is what we have said we will not pay less than in the city. Somebody says you want some incentives from the city, we have used our 380 agreements to say, you have to tell us how many people you're going to hire and what the rate is. We are doing that. We're already doing that. When somebody comes in, we take a look at it, and we have to make sure that we hold them to that.
So if we're doing that, why do we stay stuck where we are, where we're just not competitive on a wage front with other communities?
Because when you look at the number of people that are under 380 agreements, the number of people that are employees in El Paso, it's not a very large amount. That's the problem. You have like this much 380 agreements and this many working in the private sector. We can't control the rest of them. We can only control those things that we have input on. And we have started doing that, and we continue to do that. We can say, if you have a 380 agreement, one of the couple of hundred 380 agreements, you have to pay this wage. That can't control the rest of the population. That's what the problem is. That's why I say we can lead by example. Say if you're going to do business with the city, we can set a minimum wage on it. If you're going to be a vendor with the city or a contractor, we can set a wage on it. But that's all we can control.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, how would you approach the city's role in increasing private sector wages in El Paso, which is tied to the other issue we talked about of the outmigration of young people who are leaving to primarily cities like San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Phoenix, because the wage structure is better. So what can the city do?
Yeah, so there's a number of things I'd like to touch on here. One of the things that we did not well as a community is we marketed El Paso as cheap labor, and that's catching up to us. So what we can do and what we should be doing is to look at raising that minimum wage bar. Is we need to look at providing jobs, and I'm real big on economic development, and I'm just going to touch on one of my pillars, which is aerospace. When you look at aerospace and you look at Blue Origins to our east and you look at Virgin Galactic to our northwest, those are aerospace opportunities that are the only way you can get there is you have to come through El Paso. So we need to look at creating more aerospace engineering jobs. We need to continue to work with the Advanced Manufacturing Aerospace Center at UTEP. There's a lot of things we can do to start raising the minimum wage level. I'm going to go one step even further. Let's talk about healthcare. You have Steve and Nancy Fox, who have pledged over $20 million to bring a cancer treatment center to this region. Let's talk about the bond that just passed at UMC for a burn center. So when you start looking at those types of jobs, that will ultimately raise the minimum wage and provide a different level of jobs and retain our youth in our community. Those are the ones we should start going after. I'm going to go even one deeper than that. We've got Fort Bliss sitting here. We've got the military sitting here. We have an opportunity to work with our military, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and other defense contractors that are in and out of El Paso to tell them we need jobs right here in El Paso that pay more than the minimum wage.
So as a follow-up on that, what is this, and we'll use aerospace as the example, what's the city's role in building an aerospace manufacturing cluster here? Obviously, the National Science Foundation awarded the grant to UTEP. That's kind of imploded a little bit. So as mayor, how would you use your office to bring those jobs into El Paso?
The number one thing I'm going to do is make sure we're open for business. We got to be quick to business when someone approaches the city. So right now, even out of the own city manager's mouth is, she has never seen staffing levels this low in the city. She said that, I didn't say that. You can look that up. Morale is at an all-time low because staffing levels are so low. If you keep cutting, services will cut. So you have to have the staffing levels. You have to be ready to accept business when it comes to town and be able to move quickly to attract these industries to El Paso.
So we'll circle back to that when we talk about property taxes too. So the next area I'd like to talk about deals with federal relationships and specifically about how you would interact with the next presidential administration. In recent years, El Paso's mayor has been a face and a voice for El Paso on a number of significant issues, whether it's migration or COVID-19 or the Walmart mass shooting. Our mayor tends to be on national television a lot. On January 20th, Donald Trump will be sworn in as the 47th president. So I'd like to ask some questions about how you would interact with the Trump administration if elected mayor. And I'll start very generally, and Mr. Johnson, I'll have you answer first. How would you advocate for El Paso in the new administration?
So I think one of the things we have to do is we have to come up with a plan first. So what I would do first is I would work with not only the county, the state, and the local officials. I would work with our Mexican counterparts in Mexico to make sure that we have a plan that is for El Paso and the region. The other thing that I would do is I would make sure that any false narratives that are represented about El Paso, that I would be on the national media telling them what is true and what is not true. So I think we have to make sure that we come together. You know, this is a game of chess, not checkers. We've got to be prepared for what's going to happen. So we can't sit around and say we don't know what's going to happen. You have to have a plan. So I'm going to work with the county, the state, the federal officials to make sure we have a plan for our community. El Paso is not the only border community. I'm also going to take the best practices from other communities. And that's why I went to Brownsville, which I may be able to give you the answer on that one later. But I want to learn what other communities are doing good and bring that back to El Paso. Because you got to work with your state government and you have to work with the federal government. I've been working with the federal government for over 30 years. I know how the federal government works. So we got to be prepared and we got to come up with a plan, but we have to work together.
So you talk about coming up with a plan. I want to probe that a little bit. And I know you said you want to talk to a bunch of people, which is fine. But for Renard Johnson, what are a couple of must-have things on a plan dealing with the incoming administration?
So one of them is to make sure that we are dispelling any falsehoods about immigration or immigrants in our community. One of them is making sure that when they say we're infested with TDR or Venezuelan gangs in our community, that we go out and say that that's not true. So those are the plans we need to talk about. In addition, I've gone to Juarez and I've met with the mayor of Juarez a couple of times. I want to make sure that I'm in communication with him to know what's coming from his community, maybe into El Paso, and how we can handle that. We have to communicate. We have to have a relationship. I want to work with the county judge too. I want to work with anyone and everyone that has an opportunity to make sure that we dispel any falsehoods about El Paso. We've got to change the narrative. We cannot have the national media driving and dictating what happens here in El Paso. We have to tell our own story. So that's part of that plan, to make sure that I communicate, I work with the county judge, I work with our sister city of Juarez, Mexico, and in addition, we've got to work with our folks in Las Cruces, because this is truly a region. But we cannot let the national media drive the narrative because it hurts economic development. It hurts people wanting to come to El Paso. So we have to fix that.
Mr. Kennedy, how would you approach relationships with the Trump administration if you're elected mayor?
Well, the first thing is we already are working with county, Juarez, state, and federal. That's how we had $10 million in a bank account and didn't use local tax money for the surge, okay, because we were working with all those entities. I've been in those meetings and have been a part of that. So we are working with it. I actually have a little bit of a history with the Trump administration and his first time when he came to town.
You hosted him here, as I recall.
I did book the building for him. And I will say that, by the way, we are the only ones who got paid, okay, by working with them, because we did build a relationship with them.
He means the Coliseum got paid just for...
Yeah, the Coliseum got paid. I booked the Coliseum
Yep,
for him.
yep.
The Coliseum got paid.
The city of El Paso did not.
City of El Paso, which I did not do that contract.
Did we get paid for his airplane landing at our airport, or is that bill still outstanding?
Yeah, we did not. We did not. And you know, the best part is I had nothing to do with that contract. The contract I had something to do with, we got paid, because we made sure we did. And I will say that anybody who thinks that they control the media as a politician and as an office holder should probably call you, Bob, because that's not going to happen. But what we can do, and one of the things that we have started to do, is to tell our story and start the communication immediately. I mean, I think there may be some misunderstandings from the federal government and working with the from the federal level, but I will also say that that's not all there is. It has to be a two-way conversation. Instead of saying to them, here's what we need to say, first of all, nobody knows what the rules are going to be yet, because we have no idea. And immigration law is only the second most complicated law to, you know, seafaring law. And so there are so many different parts that have to be adjusted, and we already are working with state. We already are working with federal. We've got that pattern set up, and we need to continue to do that. We work with the county on what the processing is going to be, how that is going to happen. We need to know what the rules are, then we can start saying to the federal government, here's what we need, because that's what we've done in the past. Here's what we need to make your policy work. And it's been pretty successful because we've been very honest and very upfront with them.
A cornerstone of Trump's campaign has been the promise to oversee the largest mass deportation project in U.S. history. Estimates show that more than 50,000 El Paso residents are undocumented. Many of them are in mixed status families. What role should El Paso police and other city agencies play in case of a mass deportation effort in our community? Mr. Kennedy, I'll start with you.
The police department is not immigration, and we don't have the staff to run a program like that. That is inherent upon the federal. We can't disobey laws because we are not allowed to. They are peace officers. But to say that the federal government's going to do massive deportations and they're going to lay it on the foot of the taxpayers in El Paso, we don't have the ability to do it. We don't have the staff to do it, and that's not what we do. We can work alongside with somebody. We can work alongside with Border Patrol and INS, and we've done all those things, and Homeland Security. I mean, I do know that you know, the current mayor has the cell number from the guys from Homeland Security and picks up the phone to say, here's what's going on here. I think that needs to be continued, because we can't use our staffing and our police to deal with that. My problem and my biggest concern is, if this starts, what is it going to do to our economy? Because how many of those people that they are going to be deporting have jobs? How many of the individuals that are hardworking El Pasoans could be deported that have been contributing to our economy? I mean, and especially with mixed families, like you said, where, you know, mixed status families. That is a problem, and I think that's something we're going to have to deal with going forward. But I think we need to have that honest conversation with the federal government and say, this is your issue, you have done this, we have to get some help from you to make it happen.
Mr. Johnson, if you were mayor, how would you see the city's role in responding to mass deportation efforts should they come to our community?
Yeah, so we don't have the staffing levels in our police, our public safety officers to do enforce immigration issues. You know, we have 200 to 300 police officers that are currently eligible for retirement, and then we're short 300 to 400. So we don't have enough to do that. I think what we need to do is ICE and Immigration and Custom Enforcement and the other agencies that do that. That's what they do, and we need to let them do it. El Paso Police Department cannot enforce that because we don't have the staff. I will also make sure, though, that anything that falls on the back of a taxpayer here in El Paso is reimbursed by the federal government. We just don't have the staff. So that's the short answer to that one. We cannot have the PD enforcing immigration.
So this is for both of you, and I'll start with Mr. Johnson. One of the issues is a public safety issue for El Paso. One of the reasons that we have a relatively very safe community is because people in El Paso trust their law enforcement. And that's always been a concern about deportation efforts, is you drive people underground, they don't trust the local police officers. How would you maintain trust in a community that is petrified that it's about to be rounded up and shipped out of the country?
That's a difficult answer, and you know, if anyone tells you they have an answer for immigration or a magic wand to fix that, they don't. And I can certainly empathize with people that are afraid to live in their homes because they may be deported. What I can go back to on the original question is we've got to make sure that, number one, we're safe as a community. That's first and foremost, that El Paso is a very safe community. I can tell you, though, that wait times, when you have a priority 1 call right now, the current wait time for a police officer to show up is between 25 and 30 minutes. That's too long. So that shows you we have a staffing issue. We need to also communicate and work with our community to make sure that they feel safe in living here in El Paso, because so no one should be afraid to live in their homes in our community. And no one should be afraid that if they go outside that they're going to be deported, because that's not the image of El Paso. That's not what we do, and that's not who we are. So I have full confidence in our chief of police that he will make sure that our public safety officers are putting that message out there and people are not living in fear in El Paso.
Mr. Kennedy, how would you help maintain trust of those families if they're all of a sudden fearing deportation?
You know, there's an inherent mistrust of government, especially for people with varying immigration status. That's why we're undercounted in the census, because when you get the form that says how many people live in your household, they go, well, what does the government want to know? I think that we have to make sure that we do a fine line delineation between immigration and police department. And that would be what the taint would be if you started using police department to deal with any form of immigration. We need to make sure, because what happens when you drive those people under, then they start not reporting crimes. They start not reporting assault. They were the most vulnerable, now they're even more vulnerable, because the people that prey on them go, we know you won't go to the police, and that's an issue. As far as the police, we do have a surge of police officers. The last academy is 44. We hope to have the first time in 12 months that we have over 90 police officers back on the street. The academies used to be 14 people, they're now 44 people. So we've done some of that. We do have to build those numbers up, and that's something that's going to take a while, because for a long time there was a real disincentive to be a part of the police department. Our police department is doing a really good job with their community outreach. We have to continue that, but make sure we have a delineation between reporting a crime and being deported. There has to be a delineation between those two.
So the last group of questions will be about property taxes, which obviously is an issue we've addressed a couple of times already. But as the two of you know better than anybody else, that property taxes are always a top concern for El Pasoans. So I'd like to start by asking you to talk about your budget priorities over the next 4 years and how that would impact the property taxes paid by El Pasoans. And Mr. Kennedy, I'd ask you to go first.
Well, the first thing is we do have some bond issues that were passed by the public that we do have to issue. That was passed, and they will have to be issued. Obviously, taxes is a large concern, but we've already just touched on one of them, which is public safety. We have to make sure that public safety is funded correctly, and we did talk about streets. We have to have a dedicated street fund, not just a fund that can be rated for other projects. You know, when you're 40 million, 30 million, 25 million short every year of keeping your streets just as crappy as they are right now, which is what we are. We have a great streets department, but they're only as good as the money we give them. We've got to allocate them enough money where we're not just holding firm and every couple of years do a $200 million bond so we can say, oh, there's a street bond, your streets will be better, but they're not. We have to have a plan where we say we are now holding even and moving forward on an annual basis. Streets has got to be funded properly. We have got to make that happen. And public safety. Those two are the bedrock of keeping a town safe and keeping a quality of life where you can get up and drive to work and, you know, don't lose a tire because you ran through a pothole.
Mr. Johnson, talk about your priorities on the budget as mayor if you're elected for the next 4 years.
So the very first budget that I will have the opportunity to work with will be in 2026. The budget is already set for next year. And I agree, you know, we need to make sure that we are completely funding our public safety officers and giving them all the resources that they need to perform their jobs. I can tell you that, you know, the second thing that you hear when you knock on doors is the infrastructure. And if it takes $40 million to fix our infrastructure and we've only budgeted 10 million, there's a shortfall of about 30 that we have to find. But this goes back to, and it's very simple, it goes back to the no new revenue increase. You cannot cut your way out of fixing services. So we need to make sure that we fix the streets, we listen to the voters, and we do exactly what they're saying. And no new revenue is not the way to get that done. And again, I've talked to experts that say, Renard, the no new revenue increase on the budget is not the way to do it. So we've got to figure out ways and find more money. And the way to do that is through economic development and bringing in more of a commercial base and creating a higher sales tax that we can then use for projects and more quality of life here in El Paso.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly too, that the no new revenue rate, for those not familiar with government speak, is basically the amount of money that's the tax rate you have to set to raise the same amount of money on the same properties as the prior year. Any under state law, any amount above the no new revenue rate is a tax increase. So are you saying that you support and believe a tax increase is inevitable?
No, I know this is not sustainable. I know this is not, I mean, if you're short $30 million.
The current no new revenue rate is not
current no new
sustainable.
revenue is not sustainable. If we just all agreed that we're short $30 million on fixing the roads, where does the money come from? We have to find it. So you have to go in and you have to scrub the budget. You have to look through different departments and see where there may be a little excess money, because we have to fix the roads. That's what the voters want. That's what the taxpayers want. So we have to do that.
Mr. Kennedy, I want to give you a chance to briefly respond to that, because you voted for
Right.
2 no new revenue rates.
Well, I think it's
so-
funny when somebody says you can't sustain a no new revenue and you can't keep taxes flat, but I'm going to cut taxes. Okay, that makes the problem even worse. What I'm saying is if you have the chance to do a no new revenue by doing things like getting rid of a TRZ or a TERS like we did, by paying some debt off early so that the taxpayers wouldn't have to foot the bill, that's smart financial sense. When you say you can't do no revenue, but we can cut taxes, you're going to have more of a debt. You can't also spend your way out of debt. You can't say, we're going to build some projects, we're going to spend this money, we're going to do all this, but don't worry about it, our debt will go down and I'll cut your taxes by spending more money. That just doesn't make sense. What I think we need to do is we need to sit down and say, are we spending everything appropriately, which is what we did for 2 years. We sat down and said, is there ways we can do this? Yes. Can we get rid of this TERS? Yes. Can we pay this debt off early? Yes. That's why we paid off the Plaza Theater early, so that we can use the revenue from the parking meters downtown to start looking at fixing the convention center and not floating a bond. That doesn't add any taxes. It just increases your infrastructure, increases your ability to do conventions, but you don't increase your taxes by looking at things like that first. And that's what you have to do first. When people say my taxes went up, I keep telling them, we're 1 of 5, we're 30%. We are 30% of your taxes. If we stay flat and everybody else goes up, your tax bill will go up. But it's not because of what the city of El Paso did.
Bob, can I
Go ahead.
respond to that?
Please.
So I can tell you that here recently, I'm not sure he really has a plan to lower your taxes. He was just on the radio not too long ago, and he says, I'm not sure there is a way to lower your taxes. And if you want to hear him say that, you can go to Renard for 915.com.
I'll say it right now, I don't know that there's a way to lower your taxes,
Okay, so
and you don't either.
here's what we got. Through economic development, bringing in more of a commercial base, we can lower your taxes. Other communities have figured this out. El Paso deserves more. If you don't want to believe that we can't start and lower your taxes, we were the same size as Austin, we were the same size as Phoenix, we were the same size as San Antonio. We're stuck in the same place. When Bob started this conversation, he says other cities have passed us by. There's a reason for that. It's leadership. You gotta lower your taxes, and you have to believe that. Go to Renard for 915.com/truth, and he just said he doesn't know if there's a way to lower your taxes.
And neither do you.
So, last question, and then we'll go to closing statements. You both have talked about the importance of maintaining public safety. You've both spoken about the need to figure out ways to invest even more in roads to meet what the voters are telling you. Right now, about 60% of the city's general fund budget is spent on public safety, another percentage spent on roads. Is there anything in the city budget that you can see that should be cut? Because you're obviously talking about trying to find any dollars to squeeze out in the smallest part of the budget. So in looking at the city budget, are there areas you see that could be cut? And Mr. Johnson, I'll start with you.
You know, I've got to go in and scrub and really look at the budget, but, you know, once you perform a top-down review in any organization, you'll find some duplications and inefficiencies that you can work on. And then we have to look at what the county's doing as well and see if there's any duplications there. So until I scrub that budget, I don't know if there's anything we can find, but I'm sure there is. And when I get into office again, this budget's already been set. My budget won't be until 2026, so I'll have the opportunity to really go in and make my budget and look at ways for scales of economy.
You're talking about the budget this next city council will pass this summer.
Correct.
The summer of 2025.
Correct. Yeah. So until I get there, I'm not sure what we can do to make that better.
And if I remember correctly, earlier you said that you're hearing from the city manager that the city may be operating too leanly in a lot of places. Was that
Yeah,
accurate?
I mean, yeah, you can go back and look at the El Paso Inc. article where the city manager said, you know, these are some of the lowest staffing levels that she's seen since she's been at the city. And she's also said in that same article, and you could go back, El Paso Inc., where it said, you know, that morale is at an all-time low because of staffing levels. You cannot continue to cut your way out of this problem. And that's what we continue to do. We need a city that is fully staffed. We need a city that is ready to go because we have to be open for business. And when you're cutting services, things start to suffer. PD, and it goes on and on and on, permitting. So we have to make sure that we have fully staffing levels at the city.
Mr. Kennedy, any areas of the city budget where you can see that the city could maybe do less or stop doing things altogether?
I think that some of it is correct if we work with the county and looking for ways that we can have some of the services that we jointly share. IT is always one of them. People say, what can you do with IT? And can you share it to departments? And I think we have to take a look at some of those creative facilities too. I mean, I don't know if you say we need to staff up, we need to spend more money, but I'm going to cut taxes. I'm not quite sure how that works. And you cannot spend your way out of debt and spend your way out of lowering taxes. That just doesn't seem to make sense. But I will say that there are some things that we may be able to do with the county. And that's something that we need to look at, is if an IT department can be half paid by both individuals, obviously you spend less and both win. Those are things we can do. Everybody talks about doing consolidation. Some of it you can't do because it's state mandated that it's not. And I will say that we do have to make sure that we keep the police up. And yeah, there's a minimal amount after that because the bulk of it is already taken up by public safety. We have done a good job of funding public safety, and there are less things that we have to do, but we have to take care of the necessities, which is streets, police, you know, before we start looking at some niceties and say, let's build some more stuff because it's cool. That
concludes our questions for the evening, so we'll now go to closing statements. As I said at the outset, the final speaking order was determined by the trusty old coin flip. And for those of you keeping track, Mr. Johnson called tails, and it was tails, on my Eleanor Roosevelt quarter. So Mr. Johnson chose to give the final closing statement tonight. That means we'll hear first from Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, 90 seconds.
I think this is one where I know how to do this job. I've spent 2 years sitting in the room, watching it happen, watching the conversations go with state, with federal. Immigration is going to be an issue, and it's about to happen. I don't just want the job, I can actually do the job. I've been trained for this. This is one where we have to make sure we're taking care of all of El Paso, not just special interests. I mean, a lot of times people run for office, and to quote Rich Wright, they're going to promise everything but a pony. You know, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and when you ask somebody, how are you going to do that? The answer is, oh, I don't know, I'm going to look at it. When I get in, I'll fix it. Let me tell you what I bring to the table. I've sat down and I've seen this happen. We held the line on taxes because we stopped spending money we didn't have to spend. I held the line with taxes for 2 years because we led the charge. We led the charge to make sure that our police officers are paid appropriately. We led the charge to get all that done over the last 2 years, and I'm proud of that. And there's some things we do have to fix dramatically. Animal services has to be looked at immediately because we've got to get that fixed. My little street dog tells me that every time he comes up and jumps up in my lap, because that's where we got him, was from the street. There's a lot of things that need to be done. We are moving progress forward right now. We need to keep it going. We need to be a city taking care of all of El Paso and not just special interests.
Mr. Johnson, 90 seconds for your final remarks.
So let's talk about special interest first. So I'm not sure what that means, but let's talk about how excited El Paso is about my campaign. I have over 600 supporters that have donated to this campaign, some as low as $1. And then we have a 915 club that has donated to this campaign. So El Pasoans are super excited about the future. Let me also say this, you know, these special interests. I'm from the northeast side of El Paso. I didn't go to law school. I don't have a country club membership. I don't live in a gated community. I assure you of that. I'm from the northeast side of town. I come from very humble beginnings. Let's talk about my biggest donor. Let's put the elephant in the room. Special interest. You want to know who the special interest is? My #1 biggest donor is my dad. So what are they talking about? My dad doesn't need anything from me. So that's the special interest they keep talking about. So all this smoke and mirrors and this pony stuff is not real. El Paso, you deserve better. You deserve better. We deserve more. We don't need status quo. We have been stuck too long. We have been stuck like this too long. We deserve more, and I will give you more. I will work tirelessly to improve our community. Why can't we have it? Why don't we have more flights in and out of El Paso? Why don't we have the HEBs? Why don't we have more pickleball courts that you want? Because they don't want you to have it. I'm going to deliver this for you, and I'm a mayor for the future, and I'm Renard Johnson.
Can we have a pony too?
So that concludes our forum for tonight. I want to start by thanking the two candidates for a very spirited and I hope productive conversation. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Kennedy, thank you very much. And I want to thank our audience, both in person and virtually, who took the time to listen to the candidates tonight. A big thanks to FitFam El Paso for co-producing this forum and providing a live stream on their Instagram account. And thanks again to El Paso Community College for hosting us tonight. This forum has provided voters with great information they can use in deciding their vote in the mayoral runoff. You can get even more information about the upcoming election by going to elpasomatters.org. Our team of journalists is providing in-depth coverage of the mayoral runoff, as well as runoffs for 5 city council seats and a municipal judgeship. Early voting starts December 2nd. So take some time off and forget about elections for a little bit. Have a happy Thanksgiving, enjoy your family, and then come back ready to vote. Thank you all very much.